I know that sometimes these introductions tend to go on and on and on, and they're not terribly meaningful. However, in the case of these gentlemen, I did think it was very appropriate and important for you to recognize the experience and expertise that we have sitting here today, and to understand these folks are not just reading someone else's materials and making a presentation. They're the ones designing what they're going to be speaking about. We're going to have about 45 minutes to an hour of presentation, and then we're going to turn this into a little bit of a question and answer. I'll start off with some softballs, but we truly want to try to make this, pardon me, somewhat interactive with the group here, because there's a lot of knowledge and expertise here that we want to share with you and your communities. Just so that Aaron and Chris have an idea of who's in the audience, how many of you are from Baton Rouge? How many are from Lafayette? Shreveport? Now that's a shame, boo. How about New Orleans? Great. How about other cities in Louisiana? All right. How about outside of Louisiana? Okay. And the reason I want to do that is I want to be able to frame some of the questions in the context of the communities that you are living in. First, I'm going to introduce Chris Lineberger. Chris is a land use strategist, teacher, developer, researcher, author, and balances business realities with social and environmental concerns. Chris is the president of Locus. He is the Charles Bendit Distinguished Scholar and Research Professor at George Washington University, and my son is an alumni. Love GW. Non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute in D.C., founding partner of Arcadia Land Company, a new urbanism and transit-oriented development firm. He's written a number of books. He is an op-ed contributor to the New York Times and writes regularly for the Atlantic Monthly and numerous other magazines. CNN, NPR, Atlantic City's Channel, Washington Post have all profiled him, and was voted one of the top 100 urban thinkers in a 2009 poll conducted by Planetism, the international urban planning website. He was recently given the William White Urban Award for Partners for Livable Communities. So we're very, very pleased to have Chris here. Aaron Meeropol is the president and CEO of Urban Land Conservancy. Aaron has over 20 years of experience running community development and affordable housing companies. He has seen more than $150 million in direct economic development, including over 500,000 square feet of non-profit facilities and 1,750 permanently affordable homes. Aaron is the president, and, as I mentioned, and CEO of Urban Land Conservancy, a supporting nonprofit organization to the Denver Foundation. Just to give you a little context, and I'm interested in exploring this with Aaron, all of you, I'm pretty sure, are very familiar with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and Wilbur Marvin Foundation as a supporting org with its ownership of commercial properties, which is a for-profit development entity that's done a number of very important projects in and around Baton Rouge. So we want to explore the relationship of what he does with the Denver Foundation and what's going on here with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. To date, ULC has partnered on 26 real estate transactions totaling over $60 million, ranging from vacant lots to a $35 million master plan community. Prior to his work at ULC, Aaron was the executive director of Thistle Community Housing, providing oversight in one of the fastest growing nonprofit housing providers in Colorado. He is the Goldsmith Scholar in International Studies at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, has a BA in History and International Studies from Macalester College in St. Paul's, and a Master's in Public Policy from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Clearly, we have two profound experts with us today, and I'd like to welcome them. Let's all give them a round of applause and have Chris kick us off with his presentation.
Thank you so much. Well, for those of you that were here this morning, unfortunately there are no movie clips. This is time to roll up your sleeves and try to figure out how to make this stuff happen. Because what we're talking about today is financing this stuff. How do you deal with affordability? And obviously we'll be talking a lot about that. And then introduce you to a concept that many of you may not know, place management, and its role in building great walkable urban places that have long-term value and long-term character. So it starts with the fact that all of us that have gray hair grew up in a business that was, grew up in real estate when it was drivable, suburban oriented. And we all learned a lot of rules of thumb of how to build drivable suburban places. Well, every one of those rules of thumb, throw them out. They don't apply. They'll get you in trouble faster than you know, and you'll be making the exact wrong decisions. I liken the skill sets we had doing drivable suburban, low density, all the product types were separated from one another. The only transportation system was cars and trucks. I likened it to that we learned how to drive NASCARs. NASCARs go straight and they're engineered only to turn left. It's somewhat ironic given their political propensity of NASCAR drivers, but that's how, and they go 150, 180 miles an hour. What we have to learn how to do is fly fighter jets, which is you go straight, turn right, turn left, skyrocket up 5 miles or crash and burn in seconds going 600 miles an hour while you're being shot at. It's a fundamentally different skill set. You would never ask a NASCAR driver to just walk into a fighter jet. It's a disaster waiting to happen. That's exactly what's going on with building these complex, higher risk, walkable urban places. And it starts with the fact that with drivable suburban places, as you build more, the quality of life in the area declines. That you go out to a drivable suburban place for the ability to get around freely in your car, for the open space, for the clean air, and the more subdivisions you build, the more strip malls you build, the more those very qualities go away. That also explains, by the way, why the largest political movement in the history of the last 30 years is the rise of neighborhood groups. Now, every neighborhood is organized, and they're organized to stop development because of the more is less principle. With walkable urban, as you add more, the quality of life goes up. You start a virtuous cycle. This is an autocatalytic, to use an academic phrase, cycle. That as you put another rental apartment in, as you put more retail in, as you put more schools in, you put more people on the street, it's safer, more things to do. It starts, rents start going up, sales start going up, property taxes start going up, and you start this virtuous cycle. It's also known as gentrification. And I'll be talking about that in just one second. But what that raises is that we need a new approach to affordable housing. As you probably know, as I mentioned this morning, that the policy in this country for affordable housing is drive until you qualify. Just keep on driving another 10, 15 miles, and you'll find something that you can afford. Of course, you'll be spending a lot of money and time in your car, and you won't see your kids, but that's the price you pay for that affordable house. In the walkable urban world, we need to have a conscious affordable housing strategy. My suggestion is that it's a place-based, run by the place management organization, which we'll come back to. Now, in this business, this is going to lay out in one slide just some of the things that are fundamentally different between drivable suburban and walkable urban as far as how you run a real estate company. That when you underwrite a drivable suburban product, you use internal rate of return with very high return expectations, 15, 20, 25% leveraged internal rate of return expectations, which forces you to maximize the use of debt. Your best cash flows, if it's an income property, tends to come in the years 3 through 7. You get in, you get out. The location, of course, number one, most important, visibility while driving past. You want 25,000 cars, a minimum, per day passing your location. Land is priced on a $1 per acre basis. Parking, so critical to drivable suburban. If it's an income property, you're going to have 4 to 6 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail, office, whatever. You're going to have more square footage devoted to parking the car than in your building. If it's a residential, it's going to be 1.5 to 2.5 parking spaces per unit. And almost all that parking is, of course, surface. That's the cheapest. The construction is going to be wood frame, maybe concrete podium with wood frame up above, or light steel. And the tenure, your approach is you build it, stabilize it, and flip it. Get the hell out of Dodge. Now, when you're looking at walkable urban, you're going to be financing it and underwriting it using cash-on-cash returns. Net present value, internal rate of return is, you have to use it, it's just not as appropriate. And many of these deals are being done with a minimum amount of debt. Many of these deals are being done with all equity. Best cash flow years are between years 5 and 20. The location, of course, is walkable. You've got to have accessibility, and the best way of measuring that, how many of you know what Walk Score is? Okay, so about half of you. Those that don't, go to walkscore.com. It's going to be the most important tool to understand whether the location you're planning to build in or planning to buy in is in fact viable. Walk Score is between 0 and 100. Any location in the country, any neighborhood in the country. If you're 5 or 10 Walk Score, it means you got to drive everywhere. Over 70 Walk Score, it's a walkable urban place. We found up in DC that Walk Scores are the best indicator of what the rent per square foot is, what the sales price per square foot is, over 70. There's a 1-to-1 correlation. You're going to be building, or you're going to be buying based upon the price per square foot, not per acre. Parking begins to go away. It doesn't entirely, because we still have cars, obviously, but we just don't use them as much. The parking is going to be 0 to 1 space per unit, and the income property will be 0 to 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. It's almost all going to be structured. My wife and I live in a flat on Mass Ave in DuPont Circle. We have 1 car between us. It's 8 years old. We just pushed over 25,000 miles. My wife got into the car last week, and she said, "Holy smokes, I haven't driven in a year." And she had to consciously think about how to do it. The construction's going to be, concrete, podium, wood up top, concrete, reinforced concrete, or steel frame, a much more expensive way of building. And the tenure is going to be build and hold. Why sell it if you're building into this upward spiral? And this is the chart that kind of explains the difference between the two systems. The red line is the cash flow over a 20-year period of a typical drivable suburban income property development. Again, it peaks in its performance in years 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then it begins to decline as sprawl takes demand further out. And if sprawl hasn't taken demand further out, you just rebuild it in about year 10, fundamentally rebuild it and go through that cycle one more time. Once sprawl moves out, you just let it degrade and it becomes a future slum. And we move demand further and further out. The blue line is how walkable urban, more is better finances. It's not as good in the early years because the cost of land, the cost of construction is much higher. But in the mid to long term, it really pumps. It really generates cash flow. The question is, how do you fill the gap in? That's the key. So filling the gap is filled with what is referred to as patient equity. In real estate, as you know, there's equity, cash, and debt. Those are the two ways that we finance our projects. Land under your deal must be patient. You cannot have debt on the land. It's got to be contributed and must be patient. Most of our partners, well, with my developments, we either just buy the land for cash or we joint venture with people that have owned the land for decades, if not 100 years, and we just tell them, look, you'll get paid when we get paid. You haven't been getting much cash flow on this for 100 years. Well, it's not going to get much cash flow for the next 5 or 10 years. Get used to it. Number two is the off-site infrastructure, generally by the city, has to be from patient sources. There was a session earlier on about TIF. You need, obviously, allocations out of your capital budget. But there's also value sharing, also known as value capture. And in essence, you can get a piece of that upside. If you're providing upfront, off-site infrastructure, you can have a piece of that upside, but you have to be patient and wait for it. That's what value capture is. That's actually what TIF is. TIF is basically public sector value capture. Third is on-site infrastructure, and it needs to come, if you do have to use debt to do this, it needs to be from low-cost debt sources. Don't have time to go into this, but right now, Locus, which is a group of real estate developers, the chairman of the board of Locus is Pres Kabikoff of HRI down in New Orleans. I'm on one of his boards. We just had a board meeting yesterday, actually, and we approved a number of really very exciting projects. And but we're working on Capitol Hill for two programs that exist today. One's called TIFIA. This is part of the Department of Transportation. One's called RIF. One's for passenger rail. One's for freights and Class 1 railroads like MARTA and like Amtrak. That's what RIF is. In essence, if we're successful, we're trying to make it easier for transit-oriented development to use these low-cost federal sources of debt. 2.5% interest, 5 to 7 year grace period before you have to start serving 30-year amortization debt, and you can sculpt the payments over time to fit with your specific project. So if the feds are not going to give us money to build infrastructure because they're basically out of the business, what they can do is use the full faith and credit of the taxpayer to provide low-cost debt, but we have to come up with cash flow sources to pay this off. The other thing is that for we developers, we have to postpone getting development fees, and that becomes part of the patient capital. Foundations can play a role. That I had a partner who was a foundation. They provided the capitalization of a catalytic development company in a downtown turnaround. And in essence, they were taking money that was going to be invested in venture capital, their 10% that went to venture capital, and they put it into real estate, into smart growth real estate that was consistent with their mission. It's being called impact investing. And then, of course, just cash from family members, we're seeing a lot of high-tech money coming into real estate, that they made their money in doing this virtual stuff that's intangible. They want to invest in real estate because it's tangible, they can see it, and they tend to be coming in with patient equity. Now, moving towards dealing with affordable housing, and we'll be dealing with this in just one second, is that gentrification is either the most beloved or the most hated word in real estate. But it's just a reflection of pent-up demand for walkable urbanism and not enough supply. And there's two reasons for it. One is increased construction costs. I just talked about that. You know, reinforced concrete and, you know, historic rehabs and, you know, steel frame construction costs 50, 100, 125% more on a cost per square foot basis. So higher construction costs, but that's only about 30%. 70% of the reason for gentrification is increased land values. And this is crazy. As I mentioned earlier in the morning, the research we did in Boston, that's really cutting edge stuff, never done before, looking at 100% of the land use, 100% of the real estate, only 5.6% of the land is walkable urban. And it's got these huge price premiums. If it was just 8%, those price premiums for land would go away. You see this all the time. There's a part of DC, southeast of the capital, that 15 years ago was a very dangerous place. You wouldn't be caught dead there. Then again, you probably would have been. And land 15 years ago sold for $5 a square foot. And you'd put, you know, something that you couldn't steal, like gravel, on top of it. 3 years ago, Toll Brothers closed on a piece of land. Toll Brothers is a very sophisticated New York Stock Exchange company. They closed on a piece of land at $825 per square foot, going from $5 a foot to $825. That's crazy. And that's because we have a shortage of walkable urban land because it's illegal. That's why you've got to get your zoning right. So there's all sorts of things we'll talk. I'm going to scroll through this very quickly as far as what you can do. Obviously, for affordable housing strategies that I think should be place-based, you can obviously use the tax credit and vouchers, choice communities, but all these federal programs, they are woefully underfunded. So it's going to deal with 10% of the demand. Inclusionary zoning is something you might want to consider, but broaden it as far as you can go. Don't just do it in the downtown, because then you're penalizing downtown. Because basically inclusionary zoning is that if it's 20% affordable, the 80% pay for the 20%. It's going to be subsidized. The question is who's subsidizing it. So you need to broaden it to as broad a geographic area as possible. Where the subsidy is coming from, by the way, is in the land prices. The land prices will go down slightly to help subsidize that 20%. You can have a fee upon resale. Washington has this, a lot of Santa Fe has this, where every time you sell a house, a certain percentage, very small percentage, will be put into an affordable housing fund. Arlington has this over in Virginia. Impact fees, really important, because drivable suburban development is massively subsidized. I engaged in an impact fee analysis in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a town very comparable to Baton Rouge, and we found that drivable suburban housing for the infrastructure needed to build that stuff is getting it costs 22 times more than infill housing to provide the infrastructure. 22 times more. And yet everybody pays the same. So the drivable suburban stuff is being massively subsidized. Put on impact fees that level the playing field. Make granny flats, auxiliary units, legal. This is one of the simple things to do. That it's my guess, I have no numbers to back this up, so I can pick any number I want, that there's 150 million surplus bedrooms in this country. Now, Airbnb is beginning to use some of those, but we need an Airbnb for affordable housing. And it just takes a slight design modification. If you've ever watched HGTV and Property Brothers, up in Canada where it's legal to have auxiliary housing, these Property Brothers go into the basements of these entry-level home buyers and convert their dog meat basements into rental units that A, provide affordable housing, and B, help them pay their mortgage. Make that legal. You might need a catalytic development firm to get this stuff started. That's what I did in downtown Albuquerque, where you take above market risks to to come in and assemble land, make it ready to go, and then joint venture with the vertical developers. In the long term, the big issue is just create more walkable urban land. That's the number one thing we need to do to make this stuff affordable. Focus the credits and vouchers on walkable urban places. Build the other half of the transportation system so that people can get around on foot and by biking. With 25% of the average household income out in a drivable suburban location going for cars, the big thing we're going to do is shift transportation costs over into housing costs. That the typical walkable urban household only spends 9% of their household income on transportation. That 16% delta should be going in to allow people to buy more housing rather than send your money to Detroit, Stuttgart, and our friends in Venezuela. Now, value capture. The thing to do with value capture, if you engage in this value sharing, value capture, again, this could be TIF, which is public sector value capture, or it could be private sector value capture, is that if you demand money up front in a value capture type of regime, where the developers are contributing into the infrastructure or into the affordable housing, whatever the needs are of the local community, if you want the money up front, you're going to get a very little amount of money, because that's the most precious dollar that the developer has. If you have it as a tax, as a permanent assessment that every year they've got to pay X pennies per square foot, you can charge more, but recognize it's going to make it harder to finance the project because you're lowering the net operating income, which means you can borrow less money. But if you do a third way, which is that you become a partner with the developer, and you get the cash flow if the project cash flows. Now the risk is on you, the government entity that's providing the infrastructure, building the affordable housing, but you can get a lot more participation, because basically you're a partner, it doesn't hurt the financing, and if it pays off big. But it doesn't hurt the developer at all. This is kind of the wimpy approach, that I can pay you 2 hamburgers on Tuesday for a hamburger today. Now, place management. End with place management. This is a crucial thing to put in place to make these walkable urban places hum. There are 2 missing levels of management in our society. One is at the metropolitan level, and I'm not going to talk about that. One is at the place level. This is under local government. These walkable urban places, they average in size between 100 and 500 acres. They need 24/7 place management. Tends to take the form of business improvement districts where the private sector puts in place through taxation, through a voluntary tax on themselves, to put in place this business improvement district. You need at least $1 million per year in operating costs, but ideally $3, $4, $5 million, to really make it a clean and safe place, to run the festivals, to improve the parking management. And, the public sector certainly has a role in making these places work. The private sector has a key role, because they're bringing $10 to $15 for every $1 that the public sector puts in. But place management is what brings it together. And I also believe that place management is the way that we can approach and really make affordable housing work better as well through the place management organization. So here is the best example of a place management organization that, and again, it's a bad example because it's in Midtown Manhattan, but it was just such an incredible turnaround over a short period of time. This is the business improvement district that centers on Bryant Park, 5-acre park, 42nd Street, Avenue of the Americas. This is Lower Midtown, which 15 years ago, this park was run by the city. Line item, $250,000 per year. For that, the city of New York got the best drug dealing location in Midtown. And people just didn't want to go there. the buildings all turned their backs on the park. The private sector came in, told the city to keep their stinking $250,000. They privately rebuilt it, and they now manage it privately. And they have an annual budget of $12 million per year, 85% of it generated on site by the restaurants, by the Christmas festival with 60 different little jewel boxes of retailers, by the ice skating rink, by the movies on the Grand Lawn, by everything that they're doing constantly. And this is the heart of Lower Midtown at this point. Lower Midtown used to have pretty, low-end rents. Today they have the highest office rents in the country. And it's because of this park and its impact on the surrounding neighborhood. That's what place management can do, and we're seeing examples of it throughout the country. So let me just end with one more example. This is a suburban example. This is Arlington, Virginia. Many of you have heard from my colleague at Smart Growth America, Chris Zimmerman. He was the county supervisor in Arlington for 18 years, just left there 2 years ago and joined Smart Growth. And Chris is really one of the big leaders in the urbanization of the suburbs in this country. This picture on the upper left-hand corner was in one of 8 walkable urban places that they have in Arlington. And those 8 walkable urban places represent 10% of the landmass of the county, which, by the way, is the smallest county in the country. You may know that Arlington was cut off from the District of Columbia back in the 1840s and became a separate county. So this is a Sears store that closed in the 1980s as Arlington and all these walkable urban places were obviously on their back, not doing well. They put in place management and overlay zoning district. Metro came in, and so this is the same perspective today. And what you're looking at is the Apple Store, a Whole Foods, grocery, and $600 per square foot condos. The thing that happened is, and then 2 blocks north and south, this feathers back into single-family housing. That single-family housing is the highest value single-family housing in Arlington County. Why? Because they have the best of 2 worlds. They can live in suburbia and walk to 60 restaurants, walk to the metro station, walk to the urban vitality. That 10% of the land 25 years ago, when it looked like there on the upper left-hand corner, represented 20% of the tax base of Arlington and falling for obvious reasons. Today it represents 55% of the tax base. Most of the new development, about 55% of all the new development over the last 20, 25 years has been residential. So the great fear is, oh my Lord, all these rental apartments means people are going to move in and put their kids in school. Heaven forbid that we should educate poor kids, but that was the fear. But instead, all those units that showed up, they forgot to have children. So these apartments and condos, they have a school-age child generation rate 1/13 of the single-family housing. So all these folks move to Arlington, pay school taxes, and don't send their kids to school. As a result, Arlington schools are among the best in the country. And oh, by the way, they speak 80 languages in the school. This is not some lily white upper income place. It's a very mixed income, mixed race place, among the best schools in the country because they have phenomenal resources. So just have this burn in your mind as far as the difference in how we finance this stuff. But once you get onto that blue line, you really see phenomenal resources that are made available. These walkable urban places become the economic engines of your communities. Thank you very much.
Get a little comfortable if that's all right. How's everyone doing? Good, good. So, slide there, it's a nice shot looking from City Park in Denver to our Rocky Mountains. And just to give you a little bit of demographics about the city, we're about 660,000 folks now, metro-wide, which is 7 counties. We're at 2.7 million. We've seen a huge increase over the last decade of population growth. I would tell you the last 2 years has been very significant. And why is that? Any ideas why? Pot. Yeah, marijuana has done more to the real estate market, I think, than anyone clearly had any idea of. But yeah, pot. And we're getting a lot of those damn millennials. Sorry. So just to raise a hands, how many Generation X out there? Any of you? All right. So we, Generation X folks, have inherited, in many communities, some of the big challenges of what's going on in our urban communities. We got all this inflight of millennials coming in, and we have communities which are, in some cases, getting displaced. So this is one of the big challenges. All right, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge, first of all, folks here at Smart Growth. I really appreciate all the work that put this forward. It's a real privilege to be here. Never been to Baton Rouge before. I'll be back. I really was quite impressive taking a bike ride down, I guess it's south, to LSU. And holy cow, that's quite a campus. And I have to admit, is that Mike 6, I think it is? Okay, I think that's the current one. Did I get that right? So Mike 6 was hanging out in his palatial home. It was incredible. I never seen such, it was unbelievable. Anyway, I'm very impressed, I have to say. You've got some amazing campus, an amazing city. So with that, let me just give you a little breakdown of who we are. So Urban Land Conservancy is a 501c3. As you heard earlier, we're a supporting organization to the Denver Foundation. So when we were capitalized by private money, it was an oil and gas gentleman by the name of Sam Gary. He put $10 million in cash and $5 million in real estate to start us up. That cash sits at the Denver Foundation, so it's like a donor-advised fund. It's managed just like the other 700 other donors in there. That relationship is more than just being a donor, supporting the finance. They also do our backroom accounting, and we work with them in some of the strategic neighborhoods. But that $15 million, as you can see up here, has gone, now we've done over $66 million in real estate investments. 1,000 units of housing, both preservation and new construction, and then, as you heard, over 500,000 square feet of nonprofit facilities. Schools, that's been a big thing we've been getting into. We've actually just completed our first school. It's a high school for teen parents and a preschool for their kids. So that leveraging of $66 million, that's not all that significant, but when we talk about the leveraging of the developments to take place, now we're getting close to $500 million. That starts to have impact, and I think is one of the important things that you all, certainly in taking and understanding that nonprofits have a key component to our economic development work and have a key component to really the sustainability of our communities. I'll focus on one item here. Let's see. I'm gonna go to this. You see the last piece there on the 99-year land lease? That's a mechanism we use. We use really the community land trust is a model that we've adopted in most of our real estate work. So where we, as you heard earlier for Chris, how valuable the land is, well, we're in there for 99 years and it's an automatic renewal for another 99 years. Can't always do the ground lease at every location because land hasn't always appreciated as greatly in every community. But I'll give you one instance. We bought a foreclosed property 4.5 years ago from a bank for about $27 a square foot. Dirty site, meaning it had some brownfield issues, so we had to do remediation, those things, brownfield cleanup. Total maybe $32, $33 a square foot all in. Today, that same land, without any other improvements, is about $120 a square foot. That's the challenge. That's part of the reality that we're working on in the metro areas. How do we make sure that these sites, not just at light rail, but also at high-frequency bus, at these really urban central town centers, how do we make sure that we're not losing the community and that we're not losing land that otherwise could be used for community benefit? This is the huge driver in our region, besides pot. Fast Tracks is a $6.5 billion investment. It really is it's a sales tax. It's 4 cents on every $10 of purchase. So the original goal and plan of Fast Tracks, and was passed by 7 county area, which you see up here with all those lines. So you can see the numbers, 122 miles of new light rail. Just a FYI, 100 years ago in Denver, we had over 300 miles of track. Okay? So, and I'm guessing that's not unique. I know, I'm assuming Baton Rouge, you've seen that, other communities as well. So we're not even going to get to the place we were 100 years ago. But this has clearly been, and we are one of those truly sprawl communities. We've had lots of sprawl to the south, lots of sprawl to the east, a little less in the north. If you're familiar with this area, the northwest area is Boulder. People like to call it the People's Republic of Boulder. It's a very, very expensive place to be. Land prices there are probably double what I just quoted you on the site that I was talking about. And then one of the other elements about this build-out, though, is, and I said it's $6.5 billion, but it was originally, and the voters understood it was going to be $4.7 billion. So that's been a bit of a challenge. The one line that's not going to get built right now is the northwest line, the one to Boulder that also shows to go into Longmont. Everything else you see on the map is either completed or will be done in the next couple of years. Here's the status. So 81 miles of new rail, $4.5 billion has already been invested. You can see the different lines. The west line is that blue line that goes out. You can see the west line there. Then you've got the east line and the gold line. The east line, when you come to Denver, if you fly into Denver next year, say after May, because we still haven't got all the kinks worked out with the train, but you will be able to take the train from the airport down to Union Station. So that's a heavy rail, a commuter rail. And then you have the BRT, which is bus rapid transit. So Boulder is getting something, but it's just not getting the rail. So it's getting the bus rapid transit. And then we have Union Station, and that's down here in the lower angle. That's an image, but that's actually done. That's built, and it's actually over $500 million. A variety of sources, Chris, you highlighted them as well, that were used for here. Low interest financing from the feds, tax increment financing. Does everyone, when I say TIF, does everyone know what that is? You okay? Okay, great. The other component, though, the place where I feel like our organization really missed out here at Union Station, and there was a time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where we could have bought land at $50 a square foot, which we thought was crazy, but unfortunately, and we didn't. That land today is over $250 a square foot. This is some of the most expensive real estate, so it compares to Boulder, in fact, even higher. We have now office space renting at over $50 a square foot. It's crazy. Missed opportunity at Union Station. However, one station away, and this is, I'm going to jump, I'll get back to that. So we wanted to understand, ULC wanted to understand when we're investing in real estate, and again, affordable housing, some of the things we do, but we also do nonprofit facilities, schools, you heard all that. Can you see the colors here? Okay, I'm colorblind, but I think it's yellow, blue, and green. And what we wanted to track was where is the affordable housing within the metro area? What stands out for you guys when you see this? Core. It's the urban core where we've had affordable housing, HUD-financed housing, 40 years old. We've had public housing, 50-plus years old. So the urban core is where we have the most restricted affordable housing. It's also where the market has completely gone up. I mean, this hits on everything that was referenced earlier, is just that these urban core areas are the most expensive real estate areas. So overlaying that is the transit build-out. You see the gray circles are TOD sites, and how many of you think TOD is a half mile to rail? What do you think? Is that reasonable? Does that seem right? Quarter mile to bus, does that seem reasonable? Shaking heads, yeah. I would argue it's not. I would tell you that you need to be less than a quarter mile for rail stations, and you need to be a block from bus. That's what I believe for TOD. When we talk about transit-oriented development, and we like to use the C, transit-oriented communities, you need to be that close to really have an effect, and quite frankly, that's where the highest expense and most expensive real estate's at. Okay, so here's the breakdown on the counties where we have restricted affordable housing. Again, what jumps out? Urban core, where do we see the most affordable housing? In Denver. Denver, which is about 25% of the population, yet it houses about half of the affordable housing in the region. The big counties that really stand out to me, obviously Douglas County at less than 2%. That's in southwest Denver, which is this area down in the south here. So almost 5% of our housing stock is restricted affordable. We need to be more at a 10% number. Right now, the shortfall for affordable housing is about 60,000 units for the region. So that would be basically doubling what we currently have. With the build out of fast tracks, and that was, again, we will be built out, most of it by 2018, but projected by 2030, we will have another 160,000 units of housing around these transit corridors. Of that, we need to get about a third to be affordable. Why? Because we're losing, really, the workforce of our communities. Okay. And again, this is just the overlay of the map where you can see. So that blue down in the southwest, that is Douglas County. The east line, west line, you get an idea of the metro area. So that 7-county area is represented there. Every county has the line, rails, and high-frequency bus coming through it. Chris talked about this. I just want to show you about this chart. I'm sure intuitively understand all this. Housing and transportation. So the closer we're to high-frequency bus and to rail, the cheaper our transportation costs are. So if we can have more affordable housing at transit, we're cutting down that huge number, that 25% of your cost going to transportation. Instead of drive till you qualify, how do we make sure we get folks at these sites? So this is just, again, and this is data that's about 10 years old, as you can see, but it's still very, very applicable. And then this is our investments. So ULC has made, as you heard, 26 investments. Most of these are around transit. There's different colors here. Just really quickly, we had a specific fund that I'll talk more about that was used to buy properties around transit. So that's why that has its own color. I think it's orange. And then, again, you can see the east line. And here we use quarter mile. Those gray circles are quarter mile radiuses. So we've hit it. 23 of our 26 investments are at high frequency bus or at rail. This is really what got us started in getting this transit fund together. Back in 2007, soon after I started, we partnered with a nonprofit to buy an existing multifamily apartment complex on the future West Line station. So at the top, you can see it says RTD, that's the Regional Transit Authority, and just to the left of it is where that affordable housing development is. It's a 50-year-old complex. The reason that there's a frowning face there is that we have an 800-car parking structure that was built and opened 2 years ago when the West Line opened. It's so underutilized. And what a missed opportunity. And don't get me wrong, there will be chances now, but what a missed opportunity to not just build the parking, but also have the housing. So we've been working with our transit authority, with local governments to figure out a way to redevelop the site. So this is the master plan that came out of really some community engagement work. The expectation is that we will be able to start, you guys know tax credits, so would it be helpful just to hear about 4% and 9% tax credits? Is that relevant for folks here? Sure? Yeah, okay. All right, so you have, in Colorado, we don't have dedicated funding for housing. We have some general fund dollars, maybe $8 million from the state, and then the bulk of it is federal money. Home, which has been slashed by 50%, and community development block grant dollars. Those are really the leading sources. The largest producer of affordable housing in Colorado is low-income housing tax credits, which comes through the Treasury, from the federal Treasury, and is administered by our state finance authority, CHAFA, Colorado Housing Finance Authority. That generates over $100 million of equity every year in affordable housing development in the state of Colorado. Highly competitive. For every 5 applicants, 1 gets 9% credits. The other mechanism is 4% tax credits, which doesn't get you the same kind of equity. But balancing that with some other sources that we have in the state, we have a state credit. The more you want to know, I guess. But bottom line is we got creative on producing additional affordable housing using 4% tax credits. There's a big gap with 4% because it does not bring the same amount of equity. So let me just give you a for instance. On a $1 million allocation of tax credits, we're getting investors paying about $10 million. So if I got awarded $1 million in credits for my development, that's $10 million in equity, okay? For a 4% deal, that's probably more about $4 million, maybe, 3.5. So you gotta layer that with these state credits. This is the TOD fund. This is what got us moving forward around the transit sites. This is a partnership with Enterprise Communities, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The MacArthur Foundation out of Chicago was an early investor. I note Mile High Connects here because they're a partner. That is a partnership around transit and equity in the region. So that's made up of foundations, banks, and nonprofits, and that's a key partner in this work around transit development. This is just the fund structure, so you can see it. It's not a pyramid scheme, so don't hold me. It's a triangle just to kind of show. The biggest risk is our money. And again, we were created to take risk. I mean, that was really fundamental. So we're at the top. Our money is the least secure. We're buying properties. We're borrowing up to 90% loan to value. And then we're holding them for our development partners. We don't typically go vertical, meaning we don't do the vertical construction. We don't build it. We typically do the horizontal, the infrastructure improvements. That's typically our role. But in some cases, because of the competition with tax credits and because of how competitive it is, we've had to do some of our own development. This is the first TOD acquisition. This is along the southeast line in a very kind of suburban part of the city. No affordable housing in this community until we got involved about 5 years ago. So up on that left-hand corner, you can see the land. And then right behind it is single-family homes that sell for $500,000. Needless to say, there was a little bit of community concern when they heard we bought the land because they know part of our mission is to have affordable housing. We actually were able to buy one of those homeowners out. So we bought a house which has a tennis court right above there, and we wanted to buy that because we wanted to have better connectivity to our site. Plus, knocking on wood here, our transit authority has agreed to allow us to do a multi-phase redevelopment here. So what you see in that image on the right top is what we plan to do, 2 phases. The first phase is family affordable housing using 9% tax credits, which is what's getting built here on the lower one. And then that second phase is over that parking, that surface parking. So that's why we bought that site. And I just tell you again, land prices back in 2010, 27 bucks a foot. Today, I'm going to say conservatively $80, $85 a square foot on land prices there. This is a site on a high-frequency bus line, less than a half mile from Mile High Stadium and the Denver Broncos. Okay. I got it. So this location is the gateway to the west side. It's a neighborhood that's been, in the past, really challenged. It is changing fairly dramatically because a hospital that was here, the Anchor, St. Anthony's, left about 3 years ago, and that site is now going market. It's all residential redevelopment. We were able to get into the site in 2011, and this is, again, kind of the evolution of our work, is that we thought, just buy the site. We bought it for the city, and we bought it for a nonprofit partner. They'll get their financing in place. We don't have to worry about it. Well, that's not the case. We bought the site, and then we had to do the master site development. So we did all the infrastructure, and the big highlight here is the brownfield issues. So we had tanks that we thought were not there. We had done phase 2. We were digging holes. We thought we understood the site, and then once we started digging, we found a bunch of old tanks there. So that remediation was probably about $600,000 in cost, and the infrastructure was another $1 million plus. Anyway, all said and done, it was really an aha experience for us. We realize now that we need to be more engaged on that front end, not just buying the site. We're not just a land bank now. We're going to do master site development because that's the way to get these things done. And today we have a new library, this beautiful library at the bottom, and then about 10,000 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor there. Again, broke down the total development costs, what the jobs is another piece, again, that we don't necessarily do a great job talking about. We create jobs when we do this work. So 125 construction jobs, permanent jobs between the library and the commercial have been created. This is Holly Square. Talked a lot about it in my last session around community engagement. I will just tell you this, kind of be quick here. Old shopping center burned down. We have issues with California gangs. They've been in Denver for years. Crips and Bloods. This is Bloods turf, and the old Holly Shopping Center was a hangout for the Bloods. Crips retaliated on something that happened with one of their folks, and so they burned down the shopping center. We got involved right after the fire to buy the site, negotiated with the owner. The biggest issue was really we had Family Dollar there who wanted to rebuild, and we had to convince them that it was not a good thing to rebuild. And again, not taking anything away from Family Dollar, but this was a site, and the community was really clear. They wanted to see something happen that wasn't the typical redevelopment, that wasn't just going to be another shopping center. So on your right is the first phase of redevelopment. That is a Boys and Girls Club. So you've got, it's almost a 30,000 square foot facility, gym, facilities, and then they also built, and they heard the community here, they built a community facility that's another 8,000 square feet that's a part of it, where meetings can be hosted, those kinds of things. Again, using the ground lease, this is really important for us to ensure that what happens, Boys and Girls Club, if they decided to sell in 15 or 20 years, by owning the ground, we ensure that it's not going to get lost to the market. It's got to be another community benefit. And we did that because that's what really the community said. How do we ensure that the work that we've done over the last 5 years in this planning process isn't lost down the road? And I would just tell you, for just a show of hands in the room, how many of you are developers? Okay, there's not many of us. All right. Well, for you that work with developers, I would tell you that it's really important that when you come into a location in a community like this, and we worked with the Denver Foundation here as an example, where Strengthening Neighborhoods was one of their programs. They had been working in that community for 15 years. So they had a much better understanding of who the stakeholders are, the leaders are. And from that, we didn't just come in and say, oh, we're going to save the day, we're going to build a school or whatever, or even a Boys and Girls Club. We worked with Strengthening Neighborhoods and the stakeholders, and this was really a community-driven process. A long one, but a needed one. Now, we can't do this in every site. You have a lot of debt. Like here, we didn't have a lot of debt. We only had about $350,000 worth of debt. At other transit sites where you have $2, $3, $5 million in debt, you don't have 3 years to plan through this. You've got to move. So there is a fine line of how much engagement you can do and actually get through a development. These are the principles, and I won't spend a lot of time, but just so you know, we had really these core values, good neighbor principles that came out of the work. This is not far from the Holly. This is Park Hill Village West. In the left-hand corner is the land acquisition we did. This was a $6 million acquisition right along the East Line. That's the station. You get on there, you can go to the airport, or you can go down to Union Station, and that's the one that opens next year. To the right is the image of the 156 permanently affordable rental homes. That's the first phase getting built that will open in April. And then above is just, as you can see, that's our commuter rail. Phases 2 and 3 have been really about a community process. Phase 1, we had to move. We couldn't wait on getting a plan. We had to get this piece going forward. Total redevelopment is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $90 million at this location. This is where the community was really engaged. Phases 2 and 3. So it calls for up to 250 rental for sale, and then another 50,000 plus square feet of commercial. I broke down the sources of financing for those who are interested, but I don't know, are you guys interested in that stuff? Okay, I didn't hear yes. Okay, so I'll keep moving. One of the really cool things that came out of the work, though, at Park Hill Village West was this 303 Artway. This really was listening to the community. One of the biggest issues they had was, how do we connect to the station? How do we get, you see, it's hard to see, but we're at the top. Between us is this golf course, public golf course, and in Colorado Boulevard, it's a state highway, which has, for 3 blocks, no sidewalk. So it's crazy. It's just how to get access there is a huge issue, not just from Park Hill, but also from other surrounding neighborhoods. So listening to the community, we came up with this process. We were awarded this amazing grant from Art Place America for the planning. So this plan is for this first 1.6 miles connection to the station to the Holly. So number 3 is the Holly, which I already talked about. 2 is an apartment complex, a preservation deal we did, and this amazing campus that has Denver Health, senior housing, mental health center. All of that is happening. We've got this amazing, hub of activity, but we got to connect. And that's been one of the big challenges in our work. So this first part of this planning process, it's going to cost us probably in the neighborhood of $12 million. So keep moving. All right. Another source, just so you know, this is the Calvert Ours to Own campaign. This is a unique way of financing. We have a $10 million facility fund through this, and it's a notes, so you buy notes. Individuals, for as little as $20, can invest in Calvert, and then in turn, those dollars are invested in us. So we've used 10 million to buy, and I'll go right through that really quickly. But again, local folks in the neighborhood can invest in this. $20, I can buy, it's 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 7 year terms. So on a 1 year, you're getting less than a percentage point. On the 7 years, you're maybe getting a 1.5% return. So you're not doing this to really make money, but you're doing it because you care about your community and you want to invest. So to date, we have about 18 million that's been raised. We have access of about 10 million to that. And these are the things that we've purchased with it. Warehouse space, remember I was telling you about the marijuana industry? That is, I mean, warehouse space used to be $15, $10 a square foot. Today, it's exceeding $100 a square foot. That's the reality. So nonprofits who need warehouse space have been priced out of the market. And this is how we've been able to use Calvert, low interest money, way below market, less than 3%, very patient capital, 5 years, interest only. That's really key to being able to hold these things. I just want to, and unfortunately I can't show you. At the top there is this neighborhood that has been really isolated from the rest of the city. Western Stock Show, if you've been to Denver, this is a major redevelopment, and it just got the ballot yesterday, just approved. We're going to see over $1 billion of redevelopment 2 blocks from the 6-acre site we bought. So this is a really, again, being strategic around where you buy properties is also, we're recognizing this is a community that's going to change within a generation. So us getting in the front end to preserve and make sure that we've got affordable housing, that we have places for nonprofits to operate is key. All right, well, I'll just say this. Economics, here's the story. This is what, and I've jumped back to affordable housing. This is a study we did with the National Home Builders, our local Home Builders Association, a couple local other entities, telling the economic story of what just 800 units of affordable housing that came online in 2014, what that means to the economy over 10 years. Okay? That's a strong statement. That's what affordable housing does. It means this is an economic driver. And so we've got to change the paradigm of conversation when we talk about it. And finally, here are the lessons learned. How about if I just finish on this? Okay? So again, a ground lease is a tool we use. We think it's a very important one. There's a variety of things. Risk, it's a part of doing development. That's the reality. You got to be willing to take on risk. But you want to share that risk, hence like the TOD fund, hence Calvert. So with that, I want to thank you guys. Sorry if you're from Alabama.
That's all right. You saw Mike's housing, that's our version of affordable housing. As you can see from both Chris and Aaron's presentation, they're coming from an environment that has a robust culture around public transportation. And from our standpoint, I have to thank Boo and her team for bringing folks like this into our community so that we see this as an aspiration. It's something that we need to strive toward, but it doesn't happen overnight. So I'm going to dumb down these 2 presentations and ask a very simple question. If you are in a community, and I won't blame any other community in Louisiana, I'll just start with Baton Rouge, that does not have a culture of public transportation, a broad culture of public transportation, we're more like the other LA. Everybody needs to have their cars, and they want to get on the interstate. Unfortunately, bad planning 50 years ago with the interstate system just essentially strangled our community. We have funded, or we are getting better funding for public transit, but how do you work on changing the culture where the average person wants to be on the bus, wants to avoid bringing his car to get around town? Chris?
Well, the other LA,
Here, look, there's a light.
you may or may not know, in 1945, Los
Angeles had the longest rail transit system in the world. By 1962, it was gone. And they're putting it back in. They have a $60 billion system under construction right now, all funded. They have 5 rail lines under construction right now. You can now live in Los Angeles without a car. And when that system's built out over the next 5 or 6 years, you have lots of opportunity to live without a car. You know, the beauty of Los Angeles is that it was laid out as a rail transit town. So they have all these transit-oriented places. I used to live in Pasadena. Downtown Pasadena has just exploded because they put the rail back in. It just repopulated that great grid of streets. So the other LA is in fact becoming quite TOD oriented. The great story about Denver, by the way, is that John Hickenlooper, your governor now, who used to be mayor, John, as you probably know, had the best training to become mayor. He ran the largest brew pub in town. He had no political background.
That's right.
And got around on bicycles.
Yep.
And when he became mayor, the first thing he did is that he brought a lot of the leadership, the civic leadership, down to his brew pub, got them a little drunk, and said, so, if you succeed, I succeed. If I succeed, you succeed. What can we do next?
Mm-hmm.
Within 6 months, they had passed the
Ballot initiative.
the ballot measure to build fast tracks.
Right.
And it's just about done now. So it can happen. Denver is super car dominated,
Yes.
just like Baton Rouge is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Denver, we're in the West, so we like to have our cars. We like, vast spaces and all of that. So I would say part of the changing of the culture has been the affordability. And so folks are recognizing, giving up a car because I can now have a place to live. If I can be at a transit location, that's more desirable. So it doesn't happen overnight, and this has been a 10-plus year road, but it has clearly changed the way we think about things in the region.
But now going back to the question of what do you do in the interim? And you can build great walkable urban places without transit. It's what we call transit ready. So waiting for the transit, because if you build high density walkable urban, where are they going to put the stations? They're going to put the stations where the high density has been built. So in DC, which is, my research shows it's DC Metro has more walkable urbanism than any place else in the country. And 80% of it is rail transit served, but 20% of it's not. So you can do it. It's obviously, you can't get to the density, you can't get to the critical mass quickly, but it can be done. And it's a matter of changing the zoning, most importantly, on that. And by the way, I mean, we can go back and forth on how far out the impact of transit is. The research I've seen does show that a half mile out, it does affect office, but it's pretty small at that point, obviously. As you get closer to the transit station, the walk score goes up.
Right.
Again, that's the key issue. What's the walk score? And so as you get closer and closer, the walk score keeps on going up. So there's a great model in Arlington, Virginia. Again, if you want to understand the urbanization of the suburbs, you must understand Arlington. And Chris Zimmerman speaking right after this, again, he's speaking here 3 or 4 times. Again, I mentioned 18 years he was county supervisor in Arlington. And they have a place called Shirlington that is only bus served. It's a vital, walkable, urban place. Our local NPR station has their headquarters there with retail on the ground floor. They're up above, movie theaters, restaurants, high-density housing. It's just bus served and, of course, car served. And so it is possible to make that happen. You're going to be putting more in parking decks, which costs $25,000, $30,000 per space, but that's the price of not putting in rail transit.
Just as a little bit of a laboratory with downtown Baton Rouge, again, with Baton Rouge Area Foundation, CTAX, with the plans to improve downtown, and we're well on our way. We're not where we need to be. But give me one example of something, kind of a low-hanging opportunity when you're just walking around Baton Rouge, what you would recommend that we consider.
One low-hanging fruit, of course, is LSU. Universities have been phenomenal anchors and catalysts for great walkable urban places. It started at Penn. Now that was in West Philly, at that point a very dangerous section of town. Judy Roden was president, and she's now president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And Judy recognized that the reason Penn at that point was the doormat of the Ivies, since you do have a little football team here, you'll like this, that I went to a football game at Penn once, and they were playing Princeton, and the Princeton team sent their cheerleaders over to the Penn side to do a little friendly cheer for them. The cheer went, fall back, school. Nasty, right? Today, because Judy embraced West Philadelphia, it's now this super hip place, highest office rents in the state. Everybody wants to be there. Penn's number 5 in the US News and World Ranking. I think there's a correlation there. I think there's a causal connection. LSU has land. Millennials want to live in high-density, walkable urban places. LSU wants their faculty and staff to live within walking distance. It adds to the sense of community. I was involved with a nonprofit development corporation. UC Irvine had a lot of land in Irvine, California. Very expensive place. They were losing over half of the people that they were making offers to because the price of housing was too high. We built with a nonprofit, because we got the land in and we leased it to the owners at $1 a year, we got people into housing at 55% of market price. We built 1,500 units, permanently affordable, faculty and staff, and there's no reason that your university, with all of its land resources, couldn't build an academic village, a student ghetto, whatever you want to call it, that'll be a really vital place, that'll be housing for faculty, staff, students.
I would just add, riding around just downtown, I mean, you have definitely property, land that is ripe for, at some point, development. I would, again, reiterate how important it is owning the ground. And I would think, is that truly a low-hanging fruit? From the sense of what you have here in Baton Rouge with your foundation or with the development side, you have a major resource that can really lead that on some really wonderful locations right here, centrally located.
Question?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mojica. I'm a student at Tulane University in Massachusetts Sustainable Real Estate Development Program. And you mentioned very briefly the idea of what y'all doing with community investment. It sounds like residents are able to invest in homes. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm really interested in that.
Sure. Yeah, and it's so the question was about the Calvert Ours to Own campaign, in which individuals can donate or invest, as little as $20. It started. We kicked it off about a year ago. It's in, I want to say, 4 other cities: Baltimore, I believe, Washington, Twin Cities, and I think Detroit. But what it means is that in a neighborhood like the Holly Shopping Center, we can get folks to make an investment and feel connected to it. It's like, okay, my $20 is going to the work that ULC is doing here on the redevelopment, and it's not a donation, right? It's truly an investment. So,
How do you, I can't help but be a lawyer here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize.
yeah, that's okay.
How do you get past the securities issue?
It's been approved by security. It's a great question. How do you get past security? So, and we don't manage it. Calvert has worked with the securities, both the state and the feds. So it's been approved, and they've been able to make it work.
That's a great model.
It is. What I would share is that there's still a lot of work to do on that neighborhood side to get folks. So we've probably got maybe 100 small investors, and then we have maybe 10 large investors, which has then got us to this $18 million number. That's right.
Yeah.
It's the Green Bay. That's
Which
right.
would
You
be
got it.
fabulous.
Everyone owns it.
Yeah,
That's
this is known, of course, as crowdsourced financing. Fundrise is a private sector organization that has pioneered it, based in D.C., and they worked with the SEC 2-3 years ago. They went through all the brain damage to let them do this. The SEC just last week released a new ruling on crowdsourced financing to make it easier. The big fear. Well, for one thing, when you underwrite these things or when you look to invest in it, make sure you read the fine print about the fees that are being charged by the sponsor. Because these deals can engage in what's known as, of course, Hollywood accounting. Yeah, we just sold $1 billion of tickets, but we didn't make any money because it was feed to death. So you have to check the fees, make sure that they're market. But the other thing is that crooks are going to get into this thing, and that's going to be a problem. We haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen somebody trying to scam people, but it'll certainly happen.
And just to be clear, there's Calvert, there's an investment fund that's on the market side, but this is the Calvert Foundation. So separate entity, and they're a CDFI, Community Development Finance Institution, nonprofit.
Yeah, I just want to revisit the low-hanging fruit conversation from, so there are basically two corridors connecting downtown and LSU, the Miles and Nicholson. And what you see along those two corridors is the beginning of the development patterns extending out from the North Gate to LSU campus. But it's been more, I would say, niche development, right? So specifically geared towards students, or in some cases, condo development people, they want to buy a condo for family purposes and whatnot. How can we incentivize the connection of that downtown corridor with LSU in that walkable way that you all described?
Well, it should start with good planning. That there should be an overlay zoning that goes there and a strategy put in place, and ideally a place management organization, and that the university has all the incentives in the world to make that really work well. And we now have a lot of examples of not just Penn, but there's many, many universities that have understood that they can't and they shouldn't turn their back on their community, and that there's a lot of upside purely of an academic nature. And so ideally, the university would play a major role, probably as a nonprofit. The best model right now in the country is ASU. So Michael Crow's president of ASU, just a remarkable fellow, and they built a light rail line from downtown out to Tempe. Tempe is now the Tempe campus is pretty much built out. And so the light rail line has become a horizontal elevator linking Tempe to downtown. All of the growth of ASU, which is currently at 55,000 students, it's going to 100,000. All of the growth is going to go downtown. Their first phase was 5,000 beds, the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, the medical school, the nursing school. That was phase one, plus a major public open space, a park. And so all of us, I mean, and that line has just gone bananas. You know, it's like 4 times the capacity that they guessed that it was going, or how much is being carried on that light rail line. So obviously a streetcar between downtown just is just a simple thing. A streetcar is cheap, relatively speaking, and it's the right run, and you'll see both a core of development at LSU as well as downtown, and then you'll see a corridor develop along the streetcar. And that what you see is the impacts tend to be 2 blocks on either side of the streetcar, pretty uniformly up and down. You'll see a phenomenal explosion in growth if you put that streetcar in.
Well, happily, we're well underway on that planning. We have Stantec, those in the community, looking at the segment from downtown to just north of the campus, and I think it's HMTB is doing the campus piece and trying to figure out a good route. So you're absolutely right, Chris, that is critical, and funding is going to be the challenge, but it's what it is. You can see why we're out of time, but you can see why I'm excited about these 2 presentations. I know I've walked away, I'm going to walk away with some ideas that I think we need to focus our attention on as it relates to Baton Rouge. Why don't we thank Chris and Aaron for